Okay, what we're going to be doing is talking about Christianity and its beginnings in the Roman Empire and how it sort of develops in those early centuries. This is going to be an outsider's, historian, scholar's point of view of the beginnings of Christianity. We're not looking at it from the viewpoint of a person of faith, and so you may find that this does not agree with your own personal beliefs and understanding of things. That, as always, you're not responsible for accepting or agreeing. You are responsible for understanding what many historians think probably did happen. Okay, I've entitled this, or subtitled this, From Jesus' Cult to Christendom. In this sense, I think we use cult today usually as a negative word. What I mean by it here is simply a small, ecstatic, charismatic, very early beginnings of a religion. So from this very beginning of a movement, maybe is a better word, Jesus movement, to Christendom, and by that I refer to when Christianity has sort of become the established state religion of what remains of the Roman Empire. Christianity begins out of 1st century Judaism in Roman Judea. And this is a picture of a Roman aqueduct built by King Herod in Judea. It comes out of a Roman-ruled province, and this area that used to be the independent kingdoms, Israel, Judah, but now has become a ruled province by the Romans and by other peoples before them. It also comes out of the 1st century Jewish diaspora. Remember, diaspora is scattering, and if you remember Hellenism, where we talked about the blending of Greek and local cultures, one of those local cultures that get blended is the various diaspora groups of Jews across this sort of larger area of trade and travel. And that means that you have in these cities, not all of them, but some of the local Jews who can speak Greek, who are sort of attuned to this larger cultural movement of Hellenism, maybe very aware of the Romans as well. And you also have these local community centers that are built around synagogues, small places of worship, because, of course, the big temple, the center of worship, is back in Jerusalem, and they don't have access to that. Judea itself is not a calm place. It's got a lot of stuff going on. There's ongoing problems with bandits, groups of bandits fighting, groups of bandits robbing people, making it unsafe to travel. You have a number of people who are wandering around who are describing themselves as prophets, as teachers, as possible messiahs, and messiah in the sense of a military leader who is going to help them to drive back the Romans and make them once again independent kingdoms, powerful against the world. And so there's this underlying tension between Roman and Jewish authority, what should be ruled over, whether or not the Romans are insulting the Jewish religion, a whole bunch of factors going in there. So there's a lot of anxiousness, a lot of tension, and it explodes into a rebellion against Rome, 66 to 70 CE. First of a number. The religious tension specifically, you've got some different groups out there competing. You've got the temple and the temple priests. And remember, in Judaism, worship at the temple is controlled by the descendants of a hereditary group of priests. And so you've got that group who are sort of focused on tradition, who are focused on the sort of learned and experienced tradition, and see religion and worship as centering inevitably on the temple itself in Jerusalem as the central location of the Jewish faith. You've got the Pharisees, who are sort of developing over time, who are experts in law and scriptures. These are the people who are going to become rabbis eventually, or sort of that group is going to move in that direction. They don't have the birth. They aren't priests. They don't have the inheritance that you need to be a temple priest, but they have studied the law, Jewish law, they've studied the Jewish scriptures, and in a lot of ways they're maybe challenging, you could see, the priests by saying, this is what we know, this is what we understand, what this is, what you have to learn, rather than simply depending on the weight of tradition, the temples itself. You've got the Essenes who are out there who are sort of the radical groups, and some of which teach that you have to have a purified community, that just a few people comparatively who are going to be able to survive, that the apocalypse is coming, that the end times are coming, that there was going to be this huge change in the world, and only the pure, only the few can survive. And so they found records of at least one commune, Essene commune, out in the desert. John the Baptist probably might have identified as an Essene, for example. And generally there's a sense of apocalypticism, in other words, a belief that the end of the world may be coming in here. And that in fact, that God will save his chosen people, save Israel, by sending a Messiah, someone who was going to be a combination of a prophet, a warrior, a priest, who will speak for his people, his chosen people, and guide them through these end times in freedom. Okay, Jesus movement, starting in the 1st century after Jesus. And what you're seeing there in an illustration, it's from a little later on, but it's one of the common representations that were used in Roman pictures of Jesus. In this case, he's being represented as a shepherd, and so he's got with him, he's got the goat on his shoulders that he's carrying because apparently it's got problems. He's got the little goats or sheep that are next to him, the birds. All of that is sort of symbolizing Jesus' role as the guide, as the protector of his believers. Jesus himself. As historians, there are no contemporary actual historical records. What we have is the New Testament, the non-canonical Gospels, all of which were written about 50 CE or after. Josephus, who's a Jewish 100 CE, nothing earlier, nothing independent, nothing that sort of, there's no census records, there's no letters, nothing like that. That doesn't mean that it may not have existed at one point, but at this point in time, we have none of those records. So what we know about the first Christians, there's some sort of speculation in that, drawing on the documents we do have. We know that they were Jewish, overwhelmingly, they were all Jews. We know that they were very familiar with Jewish scripture and practice, and in fact, practiced it themselves. We are pretty sure that they spoke Aramaic, that's the local language, and Hebrew as a religious language. Okay, so these are not people who could read and write, probably. They're also not people who spoke Greek or Latin. They spoke Aramaic, they spoke Hebrew, they spoke the local languages, and that they were spreading the faith basically by these individual disciples, by these people speaking of what they saw, what they remember, what they know. Very charismatic speakers coming to towns, spreading the ideas, gaining followers. Okay, and I apparently was doing this a little behind on my slides. So once again, first Christians, they're Jewish, based on the Jewish scriptures and practices. They spoke Aramaic and Hebrew, and really this early faith is spread by these charismatic wanderers. This first generation of Christians, one of the things that is really setting their attitude to the world is that the fact that they're expecting the world to end. I'm drawing on the Gospel of Luke. Truly, I tell you, the present generation will live to see it all. They're expecting something to happen, and they're expecting it to happen right now. And so they're really living in preparation for that. It's probably an oral culture. People aren't bothering to try to write things down, partly because they may not be literate, but also partly because why write things down? The end is coming. Things are going to change. You don't need written records. You need to speak, and you need to speak to as many people as possible, to spread the word as quickly as possible. Probably people met in households. There's some indications of female leadership if you sort of carefully look at your translations. Meeting within communities, spreading this information. The thing is, though, is the world doesn't end. The end of the century comes, people die. The world hasn't ended yet. And so that brings up the question of what are you going to do next? The guy who has that answer is Paul or Saul of Tarsus. He's a diaspora Jew, which means that he knows Latin, he knows Greek. He's not limited to Aramaic and Hebrew like a lot of the Jews in Judea. He is someone who is interested in preaching to non-Jews. And once again, you can sort of see that fitting into him being part of the diaspora, being someone who's very familiar with the Hellenistic world. It's very normal to him to not say we need to keep this hidden knowledge, instead saying we need to bring it up, discuss it, make it open, make it available to a wide variety. Greek speaking, like I said, and primarily focused on the cities. A lot of the early followers of Jesus seem to have been primarily rural. So the first question they face is, or one of the big questions they're going to face then, is this question of, can non-Jews be Christians? Is it something that's only confined to Jews themselves? Do you have to be a Jew first and then become a Christian? The Jerusalem leaders say, yeah, you have to be, first of all, a Jew, and then you can be a Christian. The basis of it, the beliefs of it, the literature of it, the practice of it, those are all essentially Jewish. Christianity is simply an offshoot of Judaism, and that's where the base needs to be, and if you want to become a Christian, you got to start as a Jew. Paul said, yes, of course you can. This is something new. This is something different. This is not based on being Jewish to start with. And so we should be trying to attract these people who are not Jews, bring them in, and not having to have them go through the requirements that would take in order for them to actually be officially accepted as converts to Judaism. In the middle of all of this debate, you have the Roman reconquest, 70 CE, putting down the rebellion, and what you're seeing there is for the triumphal arch. Basically, this was put up to celebrate the victory in Judea. You're seeing the Roman legions, and they're carrying away the treasures from the temple, basically the religious wealth, the religious icons from the temple, and so there's, you're seeing the candelabra, basically the various things that are being brought away from there. The next period that emerges is really the period that I'd call the Christian church, sort of the church establishing itself 2nd century to 3rd century CE. And this is, by the way, an early Christian church. Not as early exactly as what we're talking about, but still a fairly early one. And if you look at it, you can see various illustrations that have been put there, Jonah and the whales there, various other Bible stories as a way of sort of attracting people's attention, but also teaching them the stories of the Bible, even if they can't read them themselves. There's a series of things they've got to look at. They've got to decide on what's going to be the canon, the official writings. So which of the Gospels do they think are actually divinely inspired Gospels, and which do they think they're just extras? Are we going to preserve the letters from the various disciples, former disciples? Are we going to try to keep them safe? What are we going to do with them? How's that going to work? Yeah, and also, which ones are authentic? Which ones are someone writing, saying what they think Paul would have said to these kinds of issues, or which one of them is can you actually prove that it was actually Paul writing himself? There's also the works of theologians who have this really wide range of interpretations of Christianity. Everything from some who have a very radical view involving reincarnation to the Gnostics who have this really strong belief that the human flesh is contaminating. It's sort of like Jainism, actually. And that therefore, if there is anything divine in Jesus, he couldn't have been a human being at all, that just wouldn't work, to what we would consider more sort of orthodox approaches of the whole thing. And it's a really difficult issue. Plus, you have this multitude of often contradictory sources out there, and you're sort of trying to decide, well, which of these we're going to pick? Which do we believe is actually the true document, the true resources that we need in the Bible? There's a focus on becoming respectable, having decorum in church, showing respect for the social order. And so you sort of get here a little bit of Corinthians where they're telling, basically Paul's saying, when you go to worship, when you're speaking, you're contributing a hymn. Some are speaking in Revelation, speaking in tongues, all these things. Aim to make sure that basically says, make your services orderly. Don't try to crush out the spirit, but make them orderly, not so people look at them and they say, this is a disruptive thing, but instead that they look at it and see as something that respects the social order. And a piece of this, by the way, is keeping women out of leadership positions. And you have in here in Corinthians saying, Women should be silent at the meeting. They have no permission to talk, but should keep their place as the law directs. Is there anything they want to know? You should ask their husbands at home. One of the accusations against Christianity used to be that it was sort of a religion of women and slaves, and you can sort of see them trying to pull away from that characterization there by asking women to stay calm, to stay silent in church. And in fact, as they start setting up the officials, the priests and the bishops are really the Christian religious authorities that are established in this early period, and they are all male. There are no females. Accusations are commonly made about Christians. Basically, accusations that were made against Christians. Accusations of human sacrifice, accusations of orgies, various other kinds of attacks on them. One said they are initiated by the slaughter and blood of an infant, and in shameless darkness they are all mixed up in an uncertain medley. And then adding to that their charge are entertainments being polluted with incest. What the accusation is basically is that they take in this blood, and some of that may be linked actually to sort of the old sort of accusation about the concept of communion, which is blood and flesh, and sort of being relating into cannibalism. But also it seems to be a really common urge to accuse people you don't like of engaging in human sacrifice of babies. It's a frequent accusation. So the accusation was that they would sacrifice an infant, they would mark themselves with the blood, and then they'd turn out the water. They'd turn out the lights, and everyone would have an orgy. And you wouldn't even know if it was your relative or whoever that you were sleeping with. Part of that might be because the early Christians like to call their get-togethers love feasts, agapes, but also, once again, secret societies, secret religions, that's one of the things humans like to accuse them of. There's also more direct accusations. One of them is based on this concept of crucifixion. It's really hard to get back there because for the Christians, it's been a holy symbol, the cross and the crucifixion, for so very long. But if you're looking at it from the viewpoint of these Romans, they're looking at it, it's basically like the Christians are saying that they want to honor the electric chair. It's a symbol of murder. It's a symbol of crime. It's a symbol of brutality. And so sort of they see this concept of worshiping a crucified man and even the instrument of his punishment as this horribleness. And there's an accusation that goes along with it that they're worshiping the head of an ass and even the nature of their father. In other words, an ass is a really stupid being, animal. This is actually what you're looking at there is a graffiti that shows the very first representation of the crucifixion. And I don't know if you can see it, but what you're looking at there's two legs going down in the bottom half of the picture. You've got two arms going out of the torso. And then if you look up to the left a little bit, facing the left, you actually have a horse's or a donkey's head. And so it's one of the first representations of the crucifixion, but it was clearly meant to be an insult. It was found in probably a school that trained servants. The worst accusation, however, made against Christians was that Christians were atheists. And for the Romans, the way this argument works is this. The gods protected the empire. Worshipping them pleased the gods. Christians refused to worship the gods, and thus by doing that, they would make the gods unhappy and they endangered the empire. So therefore, refusing to make offerings was actually an act of treason. Now we look at this and we say, no, Christians are monotheists, right? They believe in a God, they just believe in one God, and they don't believe in all these other gods. But from the Roman point of view, that doesn't improve it. It just means that they're saying, okay, all of you guys, we don't care. We just believe in this one God over here. And it's not even an old God. The really good gods and really good religious knowledge, that's secrets handed down from the past. That's gods that your ancestors worshipped. But this isn't something that's just been made up recently. So from their point of view, they're atheists, and by being atheists, they're endangering the Roman Empire. And in fact, you are required legally, as sort of part of government service, but in general, to make offerings to the gods. That's part of your duty as a citizen. And there would be periodic crackdowns to try to enforce them, and there would be people who would refuse. And the thing about being martyrs are people who refused to make offerings, refused, said that they were Christians, refused to compromise, went to their deaths and were executed for their beliefs. The thing about martyrs is there's some exceptions, but for the most part, nobody had to be a martyr. Being a martyr meant that when somebody said, "Are you a Christian?" you didn't say, "Oh, no, I'm not a Christian." And you didn't say, "Oh, well, yes, I was for quite a while, but I've now seen the error of my ways." If you were willing to do that and were willing to make an offering, as long as you didn't get caught later making the same mistake, you were usually fine. They'd let you go. The martyrs are the ones who, when confronted with that, said, "I am a Christian, do what you will." And very few of them, but they were highly venerated and looked up to. And that's actually an image of one of them, Saint Perpetua, someone who we actually have a record from, of her description of what her And they were highly worked up to as people who were executed for their faith. In her case, actually, Perpetua, her father actually tried to get her to, various people tried to get her to give in. She spent part of her time in prison pregnant. She gave birth, and then she basically left her child, left her family, and went to be executed for her faith, becoming then this sort of idealized martyr that a lot of Christians looked up to. Reality, most Christians didn't do that. And in fact, one of the ongoing problems they face in the latter part of, Christianity's time of being illegal is that quite frequently, a lot of people, when they were asked, they would say, "Oh, no." They'd panic. They'd say, or basically say, why not make a compromise? They made the offering, and then once the current crackdown was over, they would come back to the church and they'd say, "Yeah, I made an offering. I'm very sorry. Take me back." And so there was this big ongoing issue that early churches debated about. Well, do we take these people back in now that they've said they were wrong and they've apologized and they want to come back? Or do we say, once you've betrayed your faith, we won't have you back? And that's sort of one of the big debates. The majority position is everybody's welcome back. They sinned, but we'll take them anyways. Christendom, the last phase. This is when Christianity becomes legal, but not only just legal, Christianity becomes the official religion, replacing the polytheistic Roman religions that came before, starting in 312 CE. The big turning point for this is the conversion of the Emperor Constantine. And the thing about Constantine is that he legalizes Christianity. And so the story goes that he had this huge battle that he was fighting. He saw a sign in the sky of a cross, and he was told, "In hoc signe," basically he was told, "In this sign you will conquer." And he took that as an omen, and he went and he won, and he took that as a sign that he should accept Christianity. His mother had actually been a Christian, had been exposed to it before. That's the romantic version of it. Who knows? But he did legalize Christianity, and he did, on his deathbed, actually officially become Christian. That's actually something a lot of early Christians would do. Is the belief is baptism wipes you clean of your sins, right? So a lot of early Christians would say, well, let's hold off. Let me get baptized as I'm ready to die, because if I may have to sin again, basically, for the rest of my life. So let's wait till I'm ready to die, and then we'll wipe out all those sins so I can go to death with my conscience clear. And Constantine was one of those. He waited until his deathbed. He also shifts financial support to the churches, to the Christian churches, away from a lot of the pagan temples. So he gives them a lot more resources. He makes them legal. But he also demands that they stop arguing with each other. There's all these arguments we talked about what the proper faith is, what exactly Christians believe, what's the nature of the relationship between Jesus and God? What is, exactly the relationship between how human was Jesus? Was he really human, or was he just having the illusion of being a human being? Or was he a fully human being who was just chosen by God? What exactly is going on there? And so he wants them to agree. He doesn't want to support them if they're going to be fighting all the time. And so with his encouragement, they call the Council of Nicaea in 325, which has this huge impact on the Christian faith. And you've probably, if you are a Christian at some point, been exposed to it, because what comes out of the Council of Nicaea is the Nicene Creed. And that sort of becomes a foundation statement for not all, but most sects of Christianity that follow after that. And this is an early version of it. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of all things visible and invisible, and in the Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the only begotten Son of the Father, of the substance of the Father, of the God of God, light of light, very God of very God, begotten, not made. Okay, sorry, I didn't get this here. Council of Nicaea, what I'm reading here, begotten, not made, being of one substance with the Father, by whom all things are made, both of which in heaven and earth, who for us men and for our salvation came down from heaven and was incarnate, in other words, was made flesh, was made an actual human being, a flesh human being, and was made man. He suffered, and on the third day he rose again and ascended into heaven, and he shall come again to judge the quick and the dead. And we believe in the Holy Ghost. And there's some other stuff that goes into this, but we don't see this now because that's sort of the basis of most of the versions of Christianity that follow. At the time, though, pretty much every one of those statements, that represents an argument that ancient Christians had. And this is the point in which they say, okay, you lost, you won. This is the official statement of what it means to be a Christian. This is what you're supposed to believe. It's also where they close the canon. They say, okay, of all the writings out there, these are the ones that we believe belong in the Bible. All the others don't make it. So when you hear people talking about lost gospels, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the text that didn't make it into this original Bible. If you're a Protestant, by the way, the Bible you're familiar with has gone through a second cleaning process, because there's this initial one, and then later on when the Protestants split from the Catholics, there's an additional process in which other books of the Bible are gotten rid of and decided that they don't actually belong. What this does is it makes decisions about the nature of Jesus, the nature of the Trinity, and it gives you this official statement of faith, the Nicene Creed. And that's the Council of Nicaea. Isaac Newton, the scientist, by the way, believed that everything in Christianity had gone wrong with the Council of Nicaea, and it had been wrong ever since. And he devoted a lot of his life, when he wasn't thinking about science and other activities, to trying to trace exactly how Christianity had gone wrong from that point. Okay, Christendom. Christianity, after Constantine, later emperors take it from just being legal to being the official state religion. And so all the wealth of the temples officially are shifted to the church. And in fact, paganism is outlawed. So just like earlier on, you could be arrested for being a Christian, now you could be arrested for not being a Christian. And you could be put through all the same punishments for being a pagan, or a lot of the same punishments that still existed, rather than that you could have been the same way you could have been earlier punished for being a Christian. So Christianity, over this period of time, it's gone from being a branch of Judaism to an illegal cult, an underground religious movement, to being the official state religion of the Roman Empire. And it's going to continue developing from there.